I'm lucky enough today to talk to you about our great country, Australia, and effectively some of the opportunities we have when we delve into the consumer needs that we have to grow the demand for red meat. And we obviously have a few challenges as well. So I'll touch on a few of these in the journey, but obviously any questions at the end, flick our way. In terms of a broad agenda, we'll quickly give an overview of the domestic market, how critical it still is for Australian red meat, but it is changing pretty rapidly. Chatting through some of the challenges, particularly around affordability and the price of red meat. And lastly, really focusing on the consumer, and that's our real focus for how we can achieve growth moving forward. So the Australian market, we'll put it in some context. We'll talk about how we have a pretty clear target consumer for our red meat product. And yeah, it was mentioned today, but we'll touch on a few stats that show that Australians really do love their red meat. But Australia, as we view it, is changing pretty rapidly, and we need to move to keep up with these changing demands. So I'll kick off with a bit of a graph. And what you'll see here is two green bars, a little tiny dark green one and a big light green one. And just to give you some idea, this is global red meat production. In Australia, we're that tiny, tiny portion that you can see down the bottom. So we make up about 4 to 5% of global red meat production. So we're a pretty big producer, but we actually are pretty small in that global context. And what this means is we shouldn't try and feed the entire world. Our focus shouldn't be trying to get our products on the plates of every single person around the world, but we can be pretty focused. When we only produce this small amount and we produce such a high quality premium product, we can be really focused about where we actually want to sell it. And where do we focus on? Well, a great way we often start with is the income that people earn. Obviously, to afford Australia's high quality premium product, you need to earn a certain amount. And I just thought I'd throw up a quick little visual that highlighted this. If you plotted every single person on the world on a bit of a graph and had those earning less income on the left and those earning more income on the right, you'd see something a bit like this. So 8 billion people around the world and all the different households, this is roughly where you divide it up. And obviously you can see a big bulge towards the left. For Australia, generally, people need to earn about US $35,000 a year before they can afford our kind of product. And for us, it can be pretty clear that we're just focusing on that premium end. And that's about 20% of the world's population that we can really be really targeted with our small production to go into. And the great thing for us is we have a huge amount of these consumers right on our doorstep in Australia. The domestic market is still our largest and most significant, consuming just under 30% of what we produce around the world. Yeah. Unrestricted market access, obviously, so we can get into all channels. We're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We're one of the largest red meat consumers in the world, and we spend over $400 per year on red meat around the world. So let's not underestimate as well when we're looking for opportunities that the domestic market is still a huge one for us in terms of these wealthy consumers. And we bloody love our red meat as well. You know, when we look at the sales, beef is still the number one value sales in the retail stores for fresh protein. You know, it's 3 times the size of pork, and we heard some of these stats before, but 90% of Australians consider purchasing red meat every time they go into a supermarket. You know, lamb's not too far behind. It's number 4 value fresh meat, 30% bigger than seafood, and we've got about 80% of Australians constantly considering purchasing it. And when you throw these two together, basically 1 out of every $2 in the retail stores of fresh meat is beef or lamb. But you know, Australians do love their red meat, but we're also changing as a nation. You know, there's 4 key facets that we're undertaking at the moment. Australia's growing, Australia's diversifying, we're most definitely urbanising, and it's also transforming as well. And some of these have a bit of an impact on what opportunities it might mean for red meat. Kick things off with, we're growing. You know, by 2040, there's going to be an extra 10 million people in Australia. And this is great news for us in a country that's very wealthy, where we have great access and we've got great products and they love it. We're going to have 10 million more mouths that we can feed and sell red meat into as well. One of the key outcomes of that, though, is also most of this growth, or 60% of that's actually going to come through migration. And that goes to the next point of Australia's diversifying pretty rapidly. In Australia, as we kind of understand it now, isn't so much full of Australians, but it's actually a combination of so many different countries around the world. You know, we can see here the percentage of Australians born overseas is rapidly increasing in the last 60 years. And one stat that really stands out to me is that 50%, or 1 in 2 Australians, were either born overseas or had a parent that were born overseas. And we might necessarily see this spread equally in different geographical distributions around Australia, but definitely we're becoming more and more multicultural. And basically for the first time since the 1800s, we've got more people from different backgrounds than we do from our typical Australian background. In the top countries of birth, the UK is still in there, but China and India and some of these countries are rapidly rising in their migration. And what that means for us selling red meat is these people coming through and this growing Australian population aren't necessarily as familiar with lamb and beef as we traditionally see it, and the way they cook it and how they consume it is quite different as well. And with that, they bring a whole new influx of different cuisines and influences in how we consume red meat. We're also urbanising. This wouldn't be a surprise to too many people, but there's a lot less of the population now in rural or non-urban areas and gradually shifting to more urban households. When you look at the urban population, about 25% are young adults, but when you go out to non-urban areas, that drops pretty rapidly to 16%. And those kind of shifts aren't changing too quickly. The other big thing we're seeing is a growth from these larger households to much, much smaller 1-2 person households. Basically, half of all new developments are these units and apartments. And what this kind of means is the way people are preparing their food, the kitchens they might have, the size and portions they're preparing, all quite different because they're not preparing now for a household of 4, 5, 6, 7. They're preparing for the lonely one, unfortunately, or their partner as well. The other big thing we're seeing is Australia's kind of transforming. We have big generational shifts as baby boomers come out and millennials come in, but one big thing that really underpins a lot is the change in the labour force participation we can really call out. You can see here the amount of females working in Australia is gradually increasing and more, and who knows, they might, they obviously do work, unpaid work at home, but the paid work is rapidly increasing. And what this means is preparation, traditional preparation, where the partner or wife might be home preparing the food isn't so much a reality anymore. With these two people earning incomes, out doing full-time jobs, what that means for how they go about preparing their meals and using our product is quite different. And we'll touch on a few more of these points as we go through. So all up, when we're looking at some of this stuff, the traditional household that maybe we kind of assume with Australia is actually changing. It's becoming more diverse, and the way we consume our proteins is becoming quite different as well. So when we're talking about the Australian market, let's not forget it's huge, it's valuable, it's still our largest. We love our red meat. But it is evolving, and we need to make sure that we're adapting, and Graham later on will talk about some of these things in a bit more detail, but we're adapting in how we promote our product to make sure we're catering to these new Australia needs. The next thing I was going to touch on is, and unfortunately, some of the probably hard truths or some of the challenges that we face in the red meat industry. I've got up there affordability, but we've got lots of things I'll touch on around the soft economy we have at the moment, the growing price gap and price challenges we have for red meat, and lastly, some of the expanding choice that people face when they walk into a supermarket now. So this won't be any surprise to anyone, but just to land at home, unfortunately at the moment, the Australian economy is a bit softer than it's ever been in recent times. And one example I thought I'd put up is wage growth. And we can see here that the wage growth for the average Australian is actually at its lowest level it's been in a number of years. And what this means, combined with things like low GDP or growth forecasts for the future, rising costs around fuel, electricity, childcare, is the pressure it puts on household budgets. And with food being the second largest household cost, it's one that often comes in the spotlight for something that people really focus in on. This doesn't mean they'll cut back on stuff, but what this means is they'll start really prioritising what I'm spending money on and make sure I'm spending money on stuff that matters to me. And we'll talk about it a bit more, but this is a really important point in making sure that the products and what we sell, red meat, matters to them and justifies some of the price. This got mentioned earlier, but everyone's jumping on this bandwagon as times gets tougher. People are promoting more and more on these price things. Loose change menus, prices drop, $5 price points, whether it's retailers, food service operators, nothing new, but more and more pressures getting on delivering a really cheap offering to get consumers in the door. And unfortunately for us, when we look at this kind of chart, which is the ABS average retail price of the different proteins in Australia, we have chicken in the blue there, incredibly flat over the last 20 years. Pork in red, lamb in yellow, and beef there in the green. And for us, since 2000, the price of chicken incredibly has hardly moved at all, or only gone up 15%. Pork's gone up 50%, lamb's gone up 161%, and beef's gone up 90%. So in this backdrop, unfortunately for us, there's a bigger price gap on average when people are walking into a supermarket and they're making choices between the different proteins, what they need to choose. The other thing that we're kind of seeing when they walk into a supermarket store isn't just the different price gaps they're seeing between the different proteins, but also the amount of stuff they're seeing on shelf. You don't have to go back too far where it was dominated by just the 4 key proteins that we still know today, but you walk into a supermarket shelf now and there's duck, there's turkey, there's plant-based, there's shellfish, there's salmon, there's kangaroo burgers. And what this means is actually people aren't necessarily consuming this or that, they're consuming everything. And when they're making choices now, they're choosing between a much wider portfolio. And for us, as consumers, it's great we have a really versatile product, and we need to promote that more and more to make sure we're counteracting all these choices people have now when they walk into a supermarket shelf. So to round some of this stuff up in terms of a so what, the key bit I'm trying to make here is, and it's a great quote by Warren Buffett to say, price is what you pay, but value is what you actually get. And the challenge for us when our price is rising, and we can't control all of this, and some of it's actually due to some good factors, but what we need to do is make sure that we're delivering consumers more reason for the price they're paying. Make sure they understand the value and the benefits they're getting when they're buying red meat to help justify keeping it on their plate. So the great question, so when you look at all that, the backdrop at the moment is, unfortunately for us, some of the rising prices, a soft economy is creating some affordability challenges. Consumers are having more choice than they ever had before, and the need for us as red meat is to make sure that we're offering value just beyond the price that they're getting. And how do you do that? You focus on what they actually care about. We've got to focus on what the consumers want and need to make sure that we're delivering on that value. And there's many different areas that they really value, but the 3 bits I'm going to focus on today is their demand for quality, their demand for ease or to save them time, and the demand for versatility or a bit of fun on their plate as well. So quality. I thought I'd start off by offering a few examples just outside of red meat to say, as I talked about, there's budget pressures, but it doesn't mean people aren't spending on the things that they care about, the things they put value on. And a few great examples I thought I'd put up is one, ice cream. You've got $1.30 a litre for your Neapolitan for home brand, and yet somehow Ben & Jerry's, which is 13 times the price per litre or $26 a litre, is one of the products driving growth in the ice cream category. You can look at a more commoditized product like butter, and hey, mainland organic, its provenance messaging, its quality messaging is driving growth in that category. People aren't trading down if they're getting value or they're perceiving some value. And even to throw outside of food, pet food as well, even different serving sizes or some of these functional benefits they're throwing into the pet food category as well, means that they're justifying the premium that they're asking people to pay when they get to the supermarket shelf. So these are some examples outside of meat, but we definitely see it in red meat as well. Nielsen, one of the big researchers, conducted a study across all the categories in the supermarket shelf and said, which category are you most likely to pay more than the average cost for? And you know what came out number 1? Meat and seafood. So people see that there's value to be gained from buying a high quality meat and seafood. We just need to make sure we're delivering on those cues when they're talking about it. And even our own MSA research talks about, the uptick in value people are willing to pay for above quality or high quality everyday product. So when we're talking about what this means for producers and everything else, it's the focus that we need to keep having on our own quality, whether it be MSA, whether it's your own point of difference, but being really clear about what you're delivering and what value you're expecting consumers to pay for the product you're producing to make sure it's worth more to them. I thought I'd throw out a few other examples in Australia to just counterbalance some of the bad news, but when we actually look at sales in supermarket, I'll tell you what categories are growing. Steaks, your ribeyes, your Scotch fillets are up 5% on a year ago. So even though people aren't necessarily always consuming more, they might be upgrading their purchases. So rather than having the bigger bulk, they're getting a higher quality but a smaller amount. So we're seeing steaks grow. We're also seeing things like premium mince. So even something that's a bit more valuable, a bit more of a value cost thing. So whether it's grass-fed, whether it's premium, 5-star finest, some of those new categories is where we're finding growth as well. And this isn't just to Australia. If you look across the US, 50%, and beef's in growth over there, 50% of their growth in beef is coming from steaks. And we're seeing this in a few countries around the world where the growth they're getting from beef is from quality and what they're delivering to consumers beyond just price. The second bit I was going to talk about is that giving people back time. I think if you ask everyone, they say, I'm busier than I've ever been before. And what they're looking for is shortcuts that can help make their life easier. And that's something, again, we need to help deliver. And MLA recently did a really big consumer study on the types of meals people consume and prepare. And the one that took up 85% of those meal occasions was that Monday to Thursday meal that's decided after work, and it's just about getting food on the table as quickly as you can. And on average, half of the people actually spent under 30 minutes preparing this meal, and the next third of people are under 60 minutes. So they're getting it on the table pretty quickly. And again, this goes back to things like the more women in the workforce, some of the smaller households, making this more and more apparent. And again, to really prove this point, in a category outside of beef, what I've got here is a cauliflower for $4 a kilo, and what I've got next to it is a cauliflower slightly cut up for 3 times the price. And everyone goes, I'd never pay that. But I'll tell you what, a lot of people are. And it saves them time, it's in a microwave bag, but they're paying that premium. And we're seeing that, cauliflower is an example, but pre-packaged salad, pre-packaged veggies, the meals you can just heat up and go, they're all ready for your oven. They're in 20-30% growth, and when you walk into your Woolies and Coles or your Aldis, you'll see more and more of these products getting on the shelf. And Graham will talk about some of this, but it's about us making sure our product's next to it, and we're producing the products that fit in with this. And it's already happening. If we look at some examples close to the home, pre-prepared lamb and beef. We've got here, a lamb Mongolian shoulder that's growing well. We saw Coles launch their new mince, which was basically mince with some herbs sprinkled in it. But I tell you what, it's going really well for them because it's just taking the ease, making it easier for consumers when they go into the store. They know what they're going to prepare. They've got less ingredients they need to do when they get home, and they can get it on that table in under that 30 minutes that they're really looking for. Frozen meals are another one that are growing. The big pizzas, the healthy ones, all of them, that ease to get it on the table quickly, they can feed the meal with, are really going strong. And this is also just translating outside of the retail store into food service as well. What I've got here is a graph of household expenditure in Australia. And the red one is meals out and fast food, and the green one's meat, fruit and veg. And what we can really see there is the acceleration of those meals out. And this again is one, Australians love eating out. But also, again, that convenience. People are looking to grab food on the way home. It's become so much easier with the likes of Uber Eats or Deliveroo or your local pizza man or all these different deliveries to get it delivered to your door quicker. So we're seeing a huge boom in this food service area. And the big bit for us, and Graham's going to talk about, is actually this is a really important space for MLA to work with the food service guys to make sure they understand and they're putting red meat in the dishes that they serve up. The other great thing about talking back about a diversification has actually meant some of the cuisines we're actually doing in Australia are changing pretty rapidly. The top cuisines still are the likes of the Chinese, the Italian and the Thai, but the highest growth ones are your Japanese, your Middle Eastern and places like Indian. And no surprise when you see some of those migration figures and you look at Australia's tourism numbers and the amount of people now going on holidays to places like Japan, is that we see this huge growth. And for us, it actually offers some great opportunities to use our product in different cuisines. And this is actually really perfect for using a lot of cuts that are outside your standard ones, using your secondary cuts more, adding a lot more value to it, and working with a lot of these food service operators to get red meat on their plate as well. And we've seen a bit of a boom with this with even the brisket, Vietnamese cuisine, American slow cook cuisine, all that has provided a great opportunity for us to use this cut that previously was kind of undervalued, but now has got a whole lot of different uses and getting a lot more value out of it. The last one I thought I'd use to combine all these different trends together is things like the pre-assembled meal kits and pre-made meals. There can be your U-Foods, your HelloFresh, your boxes you get delivered at home that tell you exactly how you need to prepare. But these are growing rapidly in popularity because they offer high quality, they offer a great amount of ease, they give you a whole lot of variety, they're fresh, not frozen. And now you can pick them up in your Woolies and Aldis, and they've kind of realised, hey, people are driving home filling up their petrol, they're going to start selling these a lot more in things like convenience and petroleum stations as well. And what we're seeing is rapid growth in terms of 40% of increased use for some of these, and particularly with the younger generations of millennials that don't have confidence in cooking are getting onto it. So how do we talk about growing the Australian market? Well, it's really about focusing on what consumers want and will pay more for. And those opportunities exist, and they really want to focus on quality, on variety, and they want something that's going to be easy to prepare and buy them back some time. So all up, when we're looking at the Australian market, absolutely critical. Almost a third of our volume still goes there. Highly valuable markets that are growing, but it is evolving pretty rapidly. And there are some challenges for us, particularly around affordability, but what this means is we just need to offer value to these consumers beyond just the price, because if not, we're going to get blown out of the water. And how can we achieve that growth and value? We've got to focus on what the consumer wants, and it can be in a lot of different ways, but quality, variety and ease are three of those big ways. And Graham will pick this a bit more up in terms of what MLA are doing about it. Thank you.